So, hello everybody. It's me again. It's World War II TV again. We've got another interview coming up. Brothers this time. We've got two for the price of one. So, Jared and Mark Frederick are the other side of the Atlantic, and they're going to talk about their new film that they are planning about the Hürtgen Forest. So, good evening from me, my point of view. It's good afternoon for you.
Good evening.
Hello.
And we've not had anyone talking about movies in terms of makers of them. We've done our naffy natters where we've torn apart some movies and we've celebrated others, but we've never had a filmmaker on before their project has actually come to us. So tell us briefly about what it is you're trying to do and how this year has obviously impacted it, and then we can go into some more detailed questions. So what's the basic outline of the film?
Well, our 22-minute short film is going to be essentially about our grandfather, Thomas W. Nickham. He served in the 4th Infantry Division during the entirety of World War II, but it's specifically about his time during the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest. He was a lineman with the 20th Field Artillery Battalion, and so it's kind of going to just talk and discuss his mentality during that battle and just the isolationism that comes with doing that job.
Yeah, and really, what we want to do is we want to offer kind of a boots on the ground perspective. There aren't going to be any generals, there aren't going to be any officers or anything like that in this film. And as Mark said, it's really about the isolation of being a soldier. When we watch war movies, they often have hundreds or thousands of people in them. But in places like the Hürtgen Forest, men were moving around and they couldn't see 15 feet away from them. And so you don't know what is out there. You don't know who is out there. You don't know if that, branch cracking is a friend or a foe. And so those are some of the themes and I think environments that we're going to be striving to create in this short film.
And for the point of view of those watching, you're brothers, but you've also coming at this. You're both history fanatics. You're both reenactors. But Jared, you're the working in history, teaching history. Mark, you're the filmmaker. You're the creative, composition, lighting kind of guy. So you're working together, but also, and we'll touch on this later, there may be conflicts in your vision for this because there's that balance between history and storytelling and authenticity and narrative. And I guess being brothers, you're used to beating each other up and one of you getting your way. That would have been your childhood, I'm guessing. So just the arm wrestle to decide that. But the Hürtgen Forest, why you said you are focusing on the Hürtgen, but the 4th Division had an incredible career from Normandy right the way through. Why was that? Particularly because it was your grandfather's most kind of vivid memories of the war, or was it because it was the part of the war that you wanted to focus on? I mean, there's Normandy, there's other campaigns. What drew you to the Hürtgen specifically?
Well, location is one thing. Here in central Pennsylvania, we don't really have a beach that we can, replicate Normandy with. But the forests here in central Pennsylvania match almost closely with those of the Hürtgen Forest. A lot of people, when they see photos of Hürtgen, they see the iconic firs and the pine trees. But a lot of the forest is actually deciduous, and it really matches with what we have here in America. But the other thing is,
it's not a well-known story.
Yeah,
it's overshadowed, and to my knowledge, the Hürtgen Forest has only been portrayed in a movie twice, or maybe the When Trumpets Fade, the HBO movie, often overlooked. That does a fairly decent job of capturing the mood of the Hürtgen Forest. There's a segment of the Lee Marvin movie, The Big Red One, that features the Hürtgen Forest as well. And it's simply overshadowed because it's bookended by these bigger, better studied campaigns. The Battle for France, and then on the other end, the Battle of the Bulge. But for those who went through it, it was just the utmost slaughter, and it was an absolute horror. And so I think that's one reason why we were drawn to this story is most people just simply don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking at it mostly from an educational aspect. I want to educate people about this kind of forgotten, horrible conflict. And actually, after the film is released online, I would really like to do like some educational things in the classroom. I want to provide lesson plans and activities for really any student of any age, for them to do educational wise with teachers.
Because the interesting thing about the Hürtgen Forest is it's a defeat essentially of the American army, isn't it? I mean, it's you could maybe describe it as a draw, I suppose, but it's definitely not a resounding victory. And from a British point of view, we've got a bit of a history of making movies about heroic defeats. I mean, that's kind of about our British mentality, that the Dunkirk side of things, and Singapore, and even that adverse, the small group of people outnumbered. But from an American point of view, the Battle of the Bulge has a much better resolution from an American audience, because you start off the battle having your asses kicked, but then you completely go back and you kick the German asses and you end up victory. You have that conclusion at the end of the Battle of the Bulge where you're suddenly steaming on towards Germany. But the Hürtgen Forest just kind of runs out of steam and fizzles out. And for those watching, I mean, just basically, we'll do it between the two. The Hürtgen Forest was it's difficult to explain exactly what its purpose was, because that's one of the things that it's analyzed by historians, is exactly what was it supposed to do. Its objectives weren't very clear. But what's you're the historian, Jared, so what's your take on what the Hürtgen Forest campaign was all about?
In my mind, it's a story of hubris. It's a story of underestimating your enemy. There was this sentiment within American commanders that, we are going to win by sheer numbers and force of will. And the Germans flatly denied the Americans that sort of forward momentum that they were desiring. And the Americans lose at least 33,000 men as casualties in the Hürtgen Forest, perhaps as high as 55,000. And so, it's just a bloodbath of the highest order. And in regard to underestimating the enemy, I think one of the 4th Division histories that were written right after the war summed it up best, that the Germans were willing to sacrifice 4 divisions if they had the opportunity to take out 1 American division. And so it's this true war of attrition that we see playing out here. And I think one of the great contrasts of the Hürtgen Forest is, 2 months prior to this, the 4th Division was in some cases moving 50 miles a day. And now in the Hürtgen Forest, if men were moving 500 yards a day, that was considered a substantial, gain in regard to real estate that was conquered. So, the immediate objective of this division in particular was to open up the highway going into Düren, Germany. And the Hürtgenwald is a little bit to the southwest of all of that. And it was a long, hard slog. It was that case for the 28th Division that was there before the 4th Division. It was the case for the 83rd Division, which picked up after the 4th Division. And so it was a meat grinder. And that is how one of the soldiers who survived it aptly described that sort of environment. It was a meat grinder.
And I would say that we paint that very well in the short film. You kind of just see this repetitive cycle of violence that occurs over the course of months.
It was inescapable. And to go back to your point, Paul, about what battles are often depicted and what battles are not, the Hürtgen does not have a comfortable ending. I'm not saying our film is going to be a flop, but for the same reason A Bridge Too Far was a flop when it came out in 1977. It was at the tail end of the Vietnam War, and it was a story of defeat. And Americans did not want to watch a story of defeat because they were constantly reminded of it. I think for the same reason, there haven't been a lot of successful films about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. You kind of see that same sort of pattern. But it's important for us to learn from defeats as well as victories, because the losses sustained in those sorts of campaigns, they matter just as much.
Well, absolutely. But you've then given yourselves a tough challenge of having your audience leave the theater, their computer screen, their live stream, whatever it would be, with a sense of, oh, well, that was all a bit. It's nice to come away for the end of a movie when the hero has vanquished the villain, but you're never going to get that with the Hürtgen Forest. And I mean, you said you're not going to depict the generals, but the generals and Kota and people like that who was commander of the 28th by then, doesn't come out of the Hürtgen Forest with much critical acclaim. I mean, that no one had their finest hour in the Hürtgen Forest, and that's not to say that they didn't have finest hours before and after. But the Hürtgen Forest was nobody's best day at the office by any means, at least at the command level. No. And the terrain, they misjudged the nature of the terrain. And I would add on to that, for the Americans who found themselves there, I think their sense of purpose or achievement came about by the pure virtue of survival, if they were lucky enough to survive. Yeah.
It's a personal story. It's the story of squads and platoons, and it's often a story about replacements as well as veterans. And in our script, we've really tried to avoid a lot of the tropes and stereotypes that we see in a lot of war movies. There's not going to be, any tough guy from Brooklyn. There's not anyone going to be pulling grenades pins with their teeth, or anything like that. And so, we are connoisseurs of war movies, and we've watched enough of them to know the sort of environment that we want to create, and the sort of patterns and pitfalls to avoid.
Well, that makes sense, and we'll talk about the fact you're yourselves as reenactors, you understand the uniforms, things like that. But going back again to the historical, the nature of the Hürtgen Forest, that there's this idea. You said it yourself, Jared and Mark, that the German army, we had this idea they were beaten, and they weren't. But after the Hürtgen, I knew a couple of 4th Division guys and 90th Division guys, and 28th Division guys. And they were saying that the only thing they took away from Hürtgen Forest, as you said, is surviving that shit, but also that it couldn't possibly get any worse, the war. You had reached your absolute bottom. The only way now was up. And I think the Germans had experienced that in the Battle of the Falaise Gap. Any German that had got out of the Falaise pocket kind of felt, that's it now. We've seen the very worst now. No matter what they throw at us now, it can't be as bad as hammering towards that little river in Normandy, trying to get our asses out over that stream and back to Seine River. So I think that's the only thing you can look at, is that the graph had to go back up again. And some of those units had some really fine hours after that, because they dusted themselves down, said, well, we've made it, and let's go and get this war done. And the 4th Divisions, yourself know, they had a pretty glorious last few weeks, and took a lot of ground, and did kick some ass. So but let's go back to the then you're not going to put in the usual tropes and what have you. Why is it, this is one of the questions I came up with, and I like this, why is it we do put a lot of expectation on war movie producers to get things historically correct, and we don't put those same to like makers of westerns? When I'm watching Outlaw Josie Wales or The Magnificent Seven or whatever it would be, I'm not going, oh, that isn't the right. I know people do notice there are wrong guns and this, that, but we really, really expect that of our war films. There's people, friends of mine on Twitter, who as soon as the war film comes out, they're very, right, let's see how good this is going to be. Then they're looking for details into it. Why do we do that, Jared? Why do we hold the war film up to such a high standard?
Well, I would say that you have more to go off of. There's more film, there's more photos. You can blatantly see errors by just looking at archival footage or other resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least in American history, I'm not sure how Westerns are viewed globally, but I think there is a greater sense of poetry to the story of the American West, and therefore it offers more creative flexibility in the eyes of artists and authors and filmmakers. Yeah. And we are further removed from the story of the American West than what we are, World War II or the Vietnam War. We've never met anybody who was a gunslinger. We never heard anybody who was, videotaped or recorded in most cases, who lived that sort of lifestyle. And so, I think it's our closeness to the personal connection. I think it's the abundance of visual sources. Things like manuals, of course, play a very important part in all of that. And I think rightfully so. It ups the expectations in the eyes of many history buffs who become moviegoers to see depictions like that on the big screen or the small screen.
Mm. But the paradox being there, with all this information, why are so many war films so shit? I mean, that is the modern ones, particularly. We talked about a couple before we went live. We've done our bad war movies. There are some awful ones out there. That D-Day one with the wrestler guy from the Expendables last year, the Point de Hoc one was just dreadful. And that filthy, I mean, there's no excuse now. You can just go online and download all the photos and information about what gear was carried by whom, and you can go and buy it or rent it or borrow it, and it's all available. So, and then they still get it wrong. So, you in a sense, as you are both, you're filmmakers, history geeks, historians, and reenactors, you're setting yourself up for a big fall, because if you screw this up, you've only got yourselves to blame, because you've got no excuse, frankly. You've got no excuse for getting it wrong. And your grandfather was there. I should have added that your grandfather was actually in the battle. So you've got no excuse to get it to screw up here. But we'll talk about what you said your aim was going to get you're not going to do the generals. You're not going to try and talk about the bigger picture, but when if you're doing a story about a linesman and that intimate thing, how do you you've got to have context. How are you in 22 minutes to establish character, have a story, have a resolution, and establish some sense of what they're there for? That's a lot to cram into a short movie. You're confident that you've got it cracked. How are you balancing the big picture and small picture?
Yeah, and we went through, and Mark can elaborate on this a little bit, but our grandfather was not originally in the original script. We wrote a whole script, and then we reread it, and a few other people read it, and we realized that it was crap. Right. And we recognized that we had, in many ways, fallen into the sorts of traps that we were trying to avoid. So Mark can discuss where we went from there.
Yeah, it was a mess, to be honest with you. I was essentially Saving Private Ryan, but in the Hürtgen Forest. There was just kind of those stereotypical characters and cliches. There was a medic, and there was a guy that kind of was a tough guy, and there was a scared, nerdy recruit, and an intrepid leader, and kind of just all of those things that you usually see in a World War II movie. And they all, got killed off one by one, which is also a pattern that we see in movies like Saving Private Ryan and Fury. And so I had some film friends look at it, and we all kind of just decided that it was total and utter garbage, and that there was nothing new about it. And funny story is that I actually, around the time that we threw out that script, I had an interview with a local television station about the movie. And I went to the Pennsylvania Military Museum for the interview, and I'm standing in front of this big tank, and this reporter lady is asking me these questions, and I'm going, oh my God, I have no idea what the plot of my film is. How am I going to talk about my movie? And, you know, I knew that it was going to be in Hürtgen and it was going to be about the 4th Infantry Division, but that was about it. And she asked me, well, what inspired you to do this? And I said, well, my grandfather was in that battle, and he was a lineman in the 4th Infantry Division. I'm thinking to myself, wow, that'd make a really good short film. And so I finished the interview, got in my car, and immediately called Jared, and I said, I know what our short film is about.
And adding on top of that, you know, Paul, in regard to context and your bigger question, we read about a dozen books about the Hürtgen Forest. We scrounged for memoirs and reports of people who were there. I went to the National Archives, and I gathered, you know, after action reports and morning reports from various units in the 4th Infantry Division. And, you know, really what our story is it's a composite of different experiences as it was, you know, kind of fulfilled by, you know, various soldiers who were on the front lines. And so, you know, we've gathered and we've meditated and reflected on a lot of those accounts, and I think we have blended them together in a cohesive sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, our grandfather, he passed away a year before I was born, so I actually never met him. So I did not have the opportunity to ask him questions or hear his stories. And of course, Jared was very young and didn't really take advantage of asking anything. So it really was difficult to essentially write up this story about your grandfather when you don't really know his day-to-day experiences. I mean, so we went through the division history and read all these books and kind of just smashed everything together and decided, like, well, these other linemen that we have read about experienced this, this, and this, and these were common things to experience during this time. And we came to the conclusion that by morphing all of this together, we have come up with a very accurate story about our path.
Yeah, and maybe not knowing your grandfather well is actually an advantage in terms of the narrative, because if you knew him, then you then can't change. It will be harder to change what you know about him for narrative reasons. But as you don't know as much, you've got a bit more of a blank canvas there to kind of shape it the way you want, to have the goal you want. Because, you know, it's not about if this movie is successful, it's not about what your family thinks of it, although that is important. It's what about a greater audience? Because you could easily make something, you could just do a scrapbook for your family of what your granddad did, but that's not going to help the wider world. What will help the wider world is people understanding what the total cluster, the Hürtgen Forest was, and how difficult it was, and what those men endured. That's a much bigger aim. So,
exactly.
But the question I was going to ask you is about this, because you're on, you share a grandfather, you share the passion, but has your approach always been kind of side by side, or has it pulled apart? Do you disagree? Because a bit of conflict is not a bad thing, is it? Because you have to fight your corner, but this is why I want it to be this way. So tell me, how was the process of working together going for you?
I would say overall we were pretty much in sync with each other. We kind of knew the directions we wanted to go, and we were both very open about changes. Like he would come up with a great idea, and I'd go, "Oh, that's garbage," and it would go back and forth. Like, "Oh, I don't know if he should say this," or "That doesn't sound like him," or "That doesn't sound like this character." So it's definitely a seesaw of kind of just balancing each other's ideas. But you also have to keep in mind the historical context and all that good stuff that we obviously want to keep in there.
Yeah, and really, I think one of our primary goals in this project is, since we don't know the finer details of our grandfather's experience, we only have kind of this partially vague interpretation, just going by the path of his unit and what some of his comrades had to say. But really, our grandfather is merely a theatrical vehicle.
Yeah.
For conveying to the audience what this experience was like, constantly trudging through the mud, that went up to your ankles and your knees, constantly being soaked, being utterly bewildered by where you are, and a sense of helplessness in wandering around in this otherwise kind of fairy tale looking environment. And so really that is the central core of what we are trying to achieve.
And I would also like to add that I feel that both of us together learned about so much just of what he did. Like, I knew that he was a field wire chief, a lineman, but like, what is that? What jobs does that entail? And like, some of the stuff that these guys did are just insane. So he essentially ran wire or telephones from the artillery to the front line, and so forward observers could call in artillery strikes. But just the whole operation of doing that, and how organized everyone had to be, and how disciplined everyone had to be, of just running these wires. And it's a very repetitive process, and you're doing it while people are shooting at you.
Mm.
And so I found that very fascinating and unique in the way that really has never been portrayed before in any war film that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, it usually, a war movie, it has to do with frontline fighters. Every once in a while, it might have a medic as a character. But movies very rarely take into consideration the logistical process that is often not as glamorous, as someone, carrying a BAR or dragging a wounded buddy off the battlefield. And so, we feel that, this movie not only has the potential to talk about a lesser known battle, but it also has the potential to discuss lesser known duties that were in many cases just as important as carrying an M1 Grand or a musette bag full of medical supplies.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also possibly just easier to recreate. A guy rolling out wire, you can make that just as tense and exciting as a guy running up across a field and blowing up a tank with a bazooka, which is that much harder to stage, much, because you've then got explosions, things. So let's talk about the actual practicality of making a film. I'm doing a little bit of filming and stuff. We all know now that your access to lenses and cameras and editing gear and sound, you can rival Spielberg, and that's all possible now with the gear that's around now that wasn't around 20 years ago. So there's no reason why your image and your composition, your editing can't be absolutely bang on as a brand new Christopher Nolan movie. What you clearly can't afford is you can't have a cast of Matthew McConaughey and and Anthony Hopkins, the general. You've got to how are you actually fit? You're going to be using a combination of professionals and reenactors and borrowing favors, I'm guessing. So how is it actually going to come together for the terms of the cast and your crew?
Well, first of all those people are way too old to be in the military at all. But
I'm just too old. I can't think of anybody. As I was saying, try and think of someone young. My brain wouldn't come up with anybody young enough. So that's just blame that on me being in my 50s.
No, but being reenactors, we have a large group to kind of pull from. Even when it comes to props and weapons and even vehicles, we know people. We know people. They're friends. So it should be theoretically pretty easy to kind of organize, logistically speaking, all of the things that we need for this.
And it will be there certainly won't be any well-known actors in it, but
well, they might, someone might be watching right now. You just don't know. COVID, but someone be out of work.
We welcome open auditions, and
one of those kids from Stranger Things or something might be watching, going, oh, in between season 3 and 4, I've got a window. Who knows who's watching this? You don't know.
But in regard to reenactors and having a standard of authenticity, we really want people to be the right age. We're really going to be striving to not have people over age 35, have them under 200 pounds. A lot of them are reenactors. They know how to carry themselves. They know how to carry a weapon. We are going to have kind of practices and kind of these elaborate dress rehearsals to map things out and decide how we want things to look. And in regard to some of the major characters in the film, we're also very fortunate to be tied in with some mutual friends and professionals into the acting world. Just a little bit to the west of us is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which has become a big filming mecca for the Hollywood industry. And there's a lot of actors in the greater Pennsylvania area that we hope to reach out to and have auditions for in the coming year.
Well, that all sounds exciting. So where are you right now? Obviously, I've checked your website. Whatever. This year has been not a good one for getting people together. So you kind of, it's on hold at the moment. But obviously, you need to film in the winter because you'll need snow and bad weather and stuff. So where are we as of right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, the pandemic has pretty much halted everything, including the film industry in general.
Yeah.
But we're kind of just chugging along. We're trying. I've had visual style meetings with my producers, and we kind of just break down scenes, and we say, oh, it would look great this way, and we make lists of what we need. So there's just a lot of preparation work that we would be doing anyway, but this extra year now provides us with that time.
Yeah, we were originally hoping to film next month. Yes. In November and December of 2020, and our fundraising campaign began last February, which was
poor timing on our part.
Not good. There's no way we could have foreseen it. And so we started out quite well in our fundraising. And as we speak, we've raised close to $10,000. We estimate that we'll need probably in the $60,000 to $70,000 range to complete the movie as we envision it. And so we have a ways to go yet in regard to our fundraising. And a lot of that fundraising has been among businesses and individuals within our region who really believe in our project. They're excited that it's going to be filmed here in our area. And so what we're looking to do now is that we're in kind of a stepping stone fashion, move up to raising funds on the national and even international sphere. And so there too, perhaps some of the folks tuning in might even be able to help us in that realm.
Yeah, well, I'm just checking the YouTube comments. Scott Grimwood is saying, can you ask them if they are planning on connecting with the U.S. Army Center of Military History at Carlisle Barracks? I don't know why he particularly wanted to do that, but have you been in touch with them? Maybe they've got lots of money available. I don't know what his but have you contacted the Carlisle?
We do have ties at Carlisle, and we've done many living history events there over the year. But having explored that is something we have not really looked at. Whether or not the United States military would be willing to help us in any financial sort of way,
that'd be nice.
We would certainly accept that, and perhaps it would certainly be worth exploring. In many cases, though, in regard to governmental entities like that, we've been looking to them for support in other realms, and helping us find research materials and so on and so forth. But the point is well taken, and we don't plan to leave any stone unturned.
And we've got Neil Morgan, for example, whose father was iCompany 506. He's saying, how do we fund this film? And I'm hoping he means fund, not find, but fund, because how can people help? If there are people watching this and they can share, if they know people who've got pots of gold behind the couch that they want to invest in films and get an executive producer credit. I mean, I put the link to your website in the YouTube description, but obviously they can reach out to you on social media and via your website and get in touch and get involved. And as we know, there are people discussing in YouTube. There have been some pretty amazing low budget films about World War II made, and some pretty awful ones as well. But it is incredibly possible now to create something out of a very small budget and have it look amazing. I mean, I was a judge a couple of years ago on the first Normandy Film Festival, and some of these little short films, they're literally made by 16-year-olds in their bedrooms, and yet the visuals completely were the same as a Hollywood blockbuster. And I was blown away by some of the quality of the stuff coming out. And often it was actually not the visuals that was letting it down. It was the storytelling element that was a bit, oh God, it's a bit cliche written, or the dialogue was, but you've got no excuse to not get this right. So you said there, Jared, and you kind of just said, we're going to keep people under 35 and under 200 pounds. And but we all know that you said you can bring in vehicles. The vehicle owners genuinely going to be a little bit older, aren't they? And some of them might be a little bit, wider around the middle. You might have some pretty hard kind of, sorry, we'd like your half track, but you can't actually drive it. Sorry, can you sit? But it was important, I think, to maintain some standards, because we all fall out of the moment when we see some 65-year-old actor. Right, the Dirty Dozen sequels from the 80s with Telly Savalas, is that it just you cannot buy into it, because you can hear the bones creaking. You got to have people young. And the fact you're young yourselves, relatively speaking, making it. You're not some 70-year-old director making a movie after a 40-year career. You're both young yourselves. You're both at the age. You both could be serving soldiers yourself. So it's got a lot of good kind of good. What's the word I'm thinking of there? There's a good reason for it to be to work well. So the other question I had: can you actually though create a movie, whether it's a short feature or a long feature, that does satisfy the rivet counters, but also satisfies a wide audience? Because that is the big thing that seems to not happen. And I'm thinking about things like Dunkirk and 1917. Of course, they have a slightly larger budget than you're talking about, but they seem to just divide. Some people say the beach. How will you ever be able to get that balance done?
Yeah. To answer that other question real quickly, if people do wish to help us fund the film, you can visit our website that is shown in the links. And the film company's website is brushmountainmedia.com. And there you can find all of the specifics about Hürtgen, as well as links and various options to make donations. You can also follow the film's progress on the Facebook page, which is entitled Hürtgen Movie. And so those are two really good ways to stay in touch with what we're up to. We also post a lot of rich historical content on those pages and Facebook pages as well. So I think people would really be interested. But as to your question, Paul, about that sense of balance, I really think that being tied in with the living history community as we are, in addition to being thoroughly grounded in research, I mean, historical filmmaking should be the same as reenacting. And this is a nice segue from the great conversation that we had last week on your channel. Quality is grounded in research. Research should be at the bedrock of everything that we do in those realms of what we could call public history or public heritage. And I think bringing that mentality, as well as bringing in trusted, authentic reenactors who we know, really adds to that sense of accomplishment and what we hope to achieve in this production. And for so many of these reenactors who we know or have reached out to us, it's not about being paid. You know, it's not like having a typical extras casting call where it's just something else they can put on their resume and make $200 a day. People have gotten in touch with us because they believe in the story. They want to see the story told. A lot of the times, these are people who themselves had family members who served in the Hürtgen Forest. And so I think you can't buy that sort of passion. You know, we have people who have gotten in touch with us from New Hampshire and Georgia and South Carolina, people hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away from where we live and where most of this movie is going to be filmed. And they said, I want to be part of this. I'm willing to travel on, you know, on a nickel and dime budget. And, you know, and we've been so moved by that sort of outpouring. And hopefully that answers your question suitably. But, you know, I think given the level of commitment that people have shown thus far, I think and hope that it will satisfy the people who are yearning for a sense of authenticity balanced with a good story.
Yeah, it does answer my question. And I think also, going back to what we said earlier, it's that highlighting a campaign that is so often talked about at the kind of strategic level or perhaps operational level about it being Cota's bad day, but actually the men on the ground were not doing their job badly. The men at the ground were doing what they were being told to do as well as they could in very trying situation. And often at that kind of the historical kind of analyzing of the 44 era, we're comparing Hürtgen to the Ardennes or the Italian campaign, saying it's the poorer cousin, but highlighting, as I just said, that the fact that your grandfather and all his comrades in the 83rd and the 28th and the 4th, and they were all doing their job as damn well as they could in what was a very difficult situation. So there must be lots of family members as well who would like to see the Hürtgen Forest given a little bit of a not a reassessment in terms of the outcome, but a reassessment in terms of what the men on the ground achieved. I did the interview with Damon Lewis last night about his SAS book and this idea that he's able to show the stories or tell the stories of a couple of dozen brave men who died in France under the Gestapo, whose stories hadn't really come out before. And whether or not the benefits of roles by the SAS actually help the war effort is irrelevant to the storytelling about the men who are involved in it. And I feel the same way about the Hürtgen Forest, is that it, in the chapters in the books, it comes in as this kind of, well, here's where we fucked up, lads, and let's move on to when we did well. And that is really glossing over the achievements of the poor men who fought through the bloody thing. So even a short movie would do everything, I think, to help that out. Now, here's another exciting $1 million question. I've got filmmaker friends in England. You get the short movie made, it finds its platform, people like it, you get pats on the back, you win a couple of awards, blah, blah, blah. Would you then, if someone said, look, come and do a big version, we're going to throw money at you, do a 90-minute version, obviously you'd take that on, wouldn't you? You'd say yes, wouldn't you? Yeah?
Most certainly.
Yeah. So
we would.
You know, let's not limit ourselves to a short movie. Let's think about in 5 years' time, I'll be interviewing you when you've just come back. You'll be standing there holding your Oscars. And you'll be saying, Paul, remember we did that show with you 5 years ago and we talked about that short film and then we did the big one, you know? Anyway.
We'll never forget you. We will definitely come back if that happens.
I hope so, yeah, because I'll still be here, you know, because I'm not asking for a role, by the way. They don't want any fat, bald English guys, you know, in the background there sweeping up leaves. I understand I'm not needed. But, you know, what we'll bring it to an end shortly. But what other... people can help financially, they can help with sharing the information about it. What would be, I think I've asked this way, what would be your single, when the movie's out, whenever that's going to be, what would the takeaway be? What kind of comments would you like coming in? What would be the thing that would make you know it was worthwhile?
You know, as a teacher, I'm of the mind that history is best served and presented when it is conveyed in personal terms. That's often why a lot of young people don't care for history while they're growing up is because their teachers just make them memorize names and dates. I think when you can instill in an audience member or a reader that these were actual people who were high school and college-aged young men and women who had, you know, this incredible burden placed upon their shoulders. You know, if we can help convey just a sense of that, a sense of the isolation, personal strife that was undertaken by these common people, most of whom will never be known in the annals of history as individuals. If we can use the stories of a handful of common American soldiers to help present that broader struggle of the Second World War, I think that would be one hell of a legacy on the part of our little film.
Mark, do you feel, obviously you feel the same, I'm guessing?
Yes, I do completely.
So interestingly, the comments on YouTube, people are saying for all the importance of historical accuracy, you've got to have a compelling story, which of course is paramount. It's what we said earlier, that balancing of pleasing the rivet counters, but also pleasing people who are looking at it as a movie that happens to be set in World War II, who want to be whatever, I don't like the word entertain, but want to have an emotional experience to watching a piece of film, be that shock, be that pride or whatever. So you've got to get a compelling story. Interestingly, Helen Patton, that's the general's granddaughter, is saying you should contact the German museum, the Hürtgen Museum there, the German one, because it's under threat. And I think she's suggesting make contact with those people over there. So that's the general's granddaughter on side there. That's kind of a big one for you guys. So yeah, well, it's that's what I love about these things, is I never who's going to be my friends are going to be popping up on the comments there, and it's all about collaboration and cross-pollination and getting these things together. And I very much appreciate the fact you've come on and talked about your film before it's done, because it's much easier to discuss things before you've had a shot than it is once it's done. And we all go, well, it was shit, Chad. Honestly, what did you put that, you know, what did you put that 1940s snooker in there for? It's much better to get it done early and take your criticism, take your roll with the punches, take some advice. But it seems to me you've got to have everything absolutely sorted out with this. You know what you're doing. So people know how they can get in contact with you. I can only offer my congratulations and appreciation for taking a subject that is less so well known, because I said at the beginning, it would be easy to do a Battle of the Bulge movie. That would be, because, you know, we all know that, but the Hürtgen is you're biting off a big, I mean, it's a defeat. You're trying to turn something out of not a disaster, but certainly a campaign that we all go, yeah, to. So anyway, I wish you incredible luck. With any other final things you want to say, any messages you want to say to anyone watching, any last comments?
I actually just a year ago today, I was flying to Germany. I went on a small tour with 2 Americans and 2 French folks, and we had the great opportunity of just walking the landscape. And we actually visited the German museum there in Hürtgen. It was just a fantastic experience to kind of just follow in my grandfather's footsteps. And it meant a lot, because I could not only kind of just picture my film visually, I could take photographs for location scouting and kind of just get in the mindset of what these men could have been in.
And I'll just add quickly, it's I think it's rather poetic, because we're actually sitting right now in our grandfather's house. That's where I currently live. This is the house that he bought right after the war when he got married. And so I literally walk in his footsteps every day. He passed away when I was 5 years old. But, you know, I sense him here, you know, and you know, it's a tribute to him, but even more so to his generation and to his comrades who have never really been depicted in film. And this is the picture of him that hangs on my desk every day. And so for the benefit of our audience members, there's who he looked like. That's the star of our film.
Well, that's a fitting way to kind of bring this to an end. And let's be honest, all the great World War II movies have had people making them who are passionate about getting across something. Spielberg wanted to do something with Private Ryan because he wanted to get across his grandfather's story of guilt of not participating enough. And you know, that when Tom Hanks, you know, met the Band of Brothers actors and told them, you know, this is an important story to tell. It's always good. Mark, you've walked the battlefields, and to have that passion behind something it's that drives you towards that goal. And yeah, making films is not easy. I've got friends who are struggling in the industry now, but you know, it's good to have a goal, good to have a dream, and people are wishing you a lot of luck on this. So I think that's great. So in terms of World War II TV, we're hoping that we're going to bring you a live show from Vita Stansted 10, just north of Utah Beach tomorrow. It all depends on the weather. The forecast is pretty crappy for tomorrow. We don't really want to bring you something if it's subpar. If it's all raining and miserable, we don't know. We'll see. I'll make a call about midday. That's French time tomorrow, whether we're going to do that or not. If we aren't going to do it tomorrow, we'll do it sometime in the future. And then if we don't do that, we definitely have a show Monday evening with Alan Allport about his new book, Britain at War. Incredible author, teaching at Syracuse University. I loved his book, Browned Off and Bloody Minded, about the British Army. So he's coming on. He's a Brit living in America, talking about his book. Jared and Mark, I wish you well. I hope a few people watching this will be inspired to contact you and spread the word and hand over a few dollars. And Jared, I'm sure I'll see you on something else, World War II TV, because you're one of my kind of regular go-to people now. So
it'd be my honor. And thank you for having us.
Don't forget that we do encourage people to visit our Patreon page and perhaps, you know, bung us a couple of dollars every month to help making these things. It's been a bad year for tour guides, as it's been a bad year for filmmakers. So that would be nice if you could visit that. Thanks to Mark, thanks to Jared. It's been wonderful. I've enjoyed talking to you. So good luck with the film. So that's Hürtgen short film. We'll look for it hopefully next year. So thank you very much for joining me, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.